So welcome everyone to this webinar from Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, which is all about creating a positive learning environment with Cambridge CEM assessments. I'll just start with a few housekeeping notes for the session. So to ensure good sound quality, all members of the audience are muted. If you would like to ask a question, and we encourage that you do throughout the session, please post them in the questions section located on the right hand of your screen. We will answer all the questions at the end of the webinar, but please do post them as we go along and we can look through them. You will receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes, and you will receive a copy of the webinar recording sent via email next week. So before we start with the main content of the session, I'll just say a few words to introduce Cambridge CEM, which is the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. So we've been working with schools for 40 years in over 100 countries. We're known for our evidence-based research approach to baseline and formative assessments, using extensive data sets to support future outcomes and development. We work with schools, ministries and associations to transform the outcomes of the students they reach. In 2019, we became part of the University of Cambridge, which has supported our reach and abilities to support young people across the world. We help teachers turn data into knowledge, we bridge the gap between research and practice, and we provide evidence to support good decision making. I'll now hand over to our presenter for today, Suzanne Crocker, who is our Teaching and Learning Lead, to find out more about creating a positive learning environment. Thanks, Suzanne.
Hello everyone, just a little bit about me. At the moment I am working on secondment to Cambridge CEM on an action research project to work with Cambridge International Schools on creating an effective data culture. But I have a lot of experience teaching management and leadership, including data and intervention strands. So I'm going to start talking about what makes positive learning with CEM. So when you're talking about progress, when you're talking about data, when you're talking about insights, from whose point of view looking at good teaching and learning, who is the learner's point of view, or is it from the teacher's point of view? So as a teacher or senior leader, what's important to you in creating a positive learning environment? I wrote down a few thoughts here: compelling vision, promoting core values, effective leadership, engaging the school and community, high quality teaching, good school management, provision of specialist support, a safe learning environment. But have you considered it from the learner's point of view and their success? And I'm putting forward that perhaps they would be interested in high quality teaching, provision of support, provision of specialist support, and a safe learning environment. So a critical factor in the success of young people in schools is that they feel safe in the environment in which they play, learn and socialise together. And Cambridge as an organisation and Cambridge CEM have been exploring how best to create a positive learning environment in order to maximise learners' future opportunities. So how can Cambridge CEM help? Well, they have a wellbeing check and resources to create a safe learning environment, or in other words, an environment where the learner feels safe. Baseline, or sometimes called diagnostic tests, which give objective rapid data to help focus teaching and learning and support for the learner needs, as well as something called value-added reports to identify underperforming departments. More about that later. And finally, a Cambridge Learner Profile Framework as a model to gather and organise all of this data and other insights to identify resources for both learners and teachers. So we're going to talk about wellbeing first of all, wellbeing in schools. So Cambridge has come we're up with this definition that we use group-wide, that well-being is how individuals feel and function in the context of education. And we've been working with Cambridge CEM and also the University's Faculty of Education doing some research into this area, because it's a focus for many education systems, schools currently. So this is information about the Cambridge Wellbeing Check, so the CEM Wellbeing Check. So if on the right-hand side, you can see that you've got individual well-being, and then you've got two different areas, feeling well and functioning well. And under feeling well, life satisfaction and absence of negative emotions, this tends to be the kind of well-being that we talk about in Western regions. And then we've got functioning well, which is competence and interpersonal relationships. And this is more traditionally talked about in Eastern regions. And this model has been developed by researchers with the Faculty of Education and Cambridge CEM. And they have written a student-led digital assessment, which doesn't take long to complete and can be completed as many times throughout a year as the school would like, but also it has supporting lesson plans for the teachers and instant reports, and also anonymized data, so that schools can have really positive discussions, whether at senior leadership level or at departmental level. And there are 4 uses for this wellbeing check. So to teach students about their wellbeing, for teachers in the school to understand individuals' wellbeing and identify those who need support, measuring and exploring wellbeing across groups or cohorts, and then, if you're following some of the resources, evaluating the impact of interventions to improve wellbeing. So this is an example of a report, and this is for a class, and as you can see, we've got a basic scale which says no response right the way up through to always, and then you've got the questions on the left hand side. I feel good about myself, and you can see very easily from at a class level how the class is feeling generally. And on you've got RAG rating, red, amber, green, which is the most simple way of rating data. And so, for example, I feel I'm doing well. You've got 20% of that class saying never. So perhaps that could be an area to focus on. And we have resources at Cambridge that will be able to support teachers in that. So why is wellbeing linked to academic success? And research has shown that better wellbeing is associated with more adaptive forms of motivation. So students wanting to learn and progress, rather than focusing on their performance relative to others, or fear of failure, avoiding learning situations altogether. So wellbeing is linked to engagement. So students with lower levels of wellbeing are more likely to truant or skip school. And we have lots of information. We have some research pieces about creating a culture of care on this website, which is cem.org positive learning. But just a note to say congratulations to the CEM team for being a BET Awards finalist for this wellbeing check. Well deserved. Okay, the second part of creating positive learning is talking about baseline and diagnostic tests. And CEM have tests for almost every age group. So you need to select the appropriate test for your age group. So we have BASE, brand new, Cambridge Primary Insight, Mid-Year CLS, ALICE, and then CEM IBE for anybody doing the International Baccalaureate. And these tests are curriculum agnostic, so you don't need to do any revision for them. They are computer adaptive tests, and you get the reports almost immediately. And there are 4 uses for these tests in teaching and learning. So planning and focusing teaching, predictions and target setting, identifying underperforming and overperforming students, and evaluating teaching strategies. And I'm just going to look at an example report and a bit of detail for each of these 4. So planning and focusing teaching. So these are called baseline tests because not all students make the same progress, because they don't all start at the same time, which is why having a baseline at the beginning of the year or when a learner enters the school is so important. So you can have a look at this. On the left-hand side, we've got a school band graph for a year group. So what CEM does is it splits the total scores into 4 bands. So each band has 25% of the marks available, if you like, or the percentage available. So if you look at the first graph, band A, which is the top band, the most able, is very, very strong in this particular year group, and band C is very, very low, and so is band D. So this is an extremely able cohort, so you might plan your teaching accordingly. And what you might do if you've been using CEM data for several years, you might look at the context in the right-hand graph, which looks at previous years' profiles using the bands. So for example, the 2019 cohort, band D, which is in red, is quite big. And if you go back to 2015, you could say that's a similar profile. What did we do teaching and learning in 2015? And by which point you will have the results from IGCSE or from International A-level, and you can see whether it worked or not, and you can use the resources that you used in 2015, for example, or the extra support. As we all know, when you've got a curriculum or a scheme of work, that's the ideal, that's the average, and you need to focus your teaching according to the needs of your learners. The other thing that you can do is look at predictions and target setting. So here we've got something that is called a chances graph, and this is projecting forward, looking at the potential of the learners, and this is for mathematics, maths, IGCSE, and Learner 4. CEM looks at the data that they have got to see how learners with a similar profile to Learner 4, this just happens to be mid-year, so year or grade 7, how they actually did in their IGCSEs. So this learner has, they're saying, projecting forward, has got a 32% chance of a grade B, but also bear in mind that they've got 28% chance of getting an A, and learners like this also, some of them got an A star, but some of them also got a C and a D and an E. So it is a focusing of an area. I would say to this learner, you're A stroke B, but please bear in mind that if you don't work hard, then you could get a C, or we could work really hard and focus and go for an A star. So it's a learning conversation. Learner 5, A star stroke A. And what I've found is if you say A star, it usually puts learners off no matter how able or how much potential they have. So I would usually say A star. And then we've got identifying underperforming and overperforming students. So this is about progress. Are they on track? And you can create your own graphs where you've got your school grade or the results of your subject assessments plotted against their baseline or diagnostic score. And then that way you can spot any students who are underperforming. So that's under the line that's drawn on the graph. I recognise that when students are on track, so we've got a little red circle for the what dots that are on the line, and also you can identify and praise and learn from students who are overperforming. So what is it that's different about them? Is it their engagement? Is it extra work? Is it focused study time? And you can learn from them and incorporate that into your teaching and learning plans. And you can evaluate teaching strategies. So this is a value added, and they're called standardized residuals. That means that CEM shows have the students or the learners in a class or a cohort made the expected amount of progress. So if you think back to those chances graphs where you're projecting forward about their potential, when you come to the end of the course, so for example IGCSE or A-level, you can put in the actual results and then you can have a look to see whether there are any departments that are making particularly positive progress above what's expected, or any department that's making negative progress. So for example here, A2 or A-level economics has been highlighted in red, and then the senior leaders can and heads of department can investigate further about why that has happened. And it isn't about making judgments about performance, it's about supporting improvements. Okay, the third area for creating a positive learning environment or positive learning is a Cambridge Learner Profile Framework. And it's an organising framework to help teachers and senior leaders make informed decisions around assessments. We have touched upon so far in this presentation about talking about potential and capability. As you can see, we've got cognitive skills and capabilities in the red section. We've talked about a little bit subconsciously about accessing the curriculum. That's cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding. So there are other areas of insight that have been shown by education research done by Cambridge CEM to feed into educational success, not just the domain knowledge, the curriculum coverage, which would be your subject-specific assessments and progress. And there are many interactions amongst these areas of insight, but it is a simple way of gathering data and insight which will help teachers make decisions and focus support and teaching and learning in an appropriate area. Because if a student is underperforming and you ask them to attend revision on your subject, when actually it's another area that has a gap or a barrier to learning, then no matter how much revision that student does, they are still not going to be able to make as much progress as you would like. And almost all assessments, evaluations and teaching resources can be plotted against these 5 areas. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that. If you want more in-depth information about what affects educational achievement, again, on that positive learning landing page, there's some quick guides which might be able to help you. So if we're thinking about that first area, cognitive skills and capabilities, we're asking the question, how able are our learners and what is their potential? And we'll often assess it near the beginning of the school year. When we have a new cohort of learners, we might receive some data from prior learning, but we don't know an awful lot about these learners. And these are the CEM baseline tests that include things like non-verbal reasoning, verbal reasoning. They're curriculum free, so they're not taught in lessons, and nor can they, it's very difficult to actually teach them in lessons. But predictive validity research has shown that they're very good at predicting later performance in these subjects that are up here: maths, sciences, design and technology, geography, art and drama. And also in the context of international schools, they are useful in understanding the ability of students with English as an additional language, because they have a low English language load, so they're easily accessible. Then we've got cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding. So how easy will it be for learners to access the curricula? Again, often assessing it at the start of the school year. Maths concepts, vocabulary, language comprehension. When I say language comprehension, I mean English. And this is taught across multiple subjects. It can be taught in the classroom, but also it's acquired outside of lessons. So the interactions between learners in the playground, in the canteen, wherever. And they are strong predictors of performance in a wide range of school subjects. And again, some parts of the CEM baseline tests cover this particular area, but also some of the Cambridge English tests, where obviously if you're in an international school and you're using English as a medium of teaching or medium of instruction, both teachers and students have got to be able to actively and passively use English up to the right level. Then we've got the one that our subject teachers are most familiar with, domain knowledge. Are learners absorbing the curriculum and progressing well? So this is often assessed throughout the school year. It is a strong predictor of academic performance, and it can be assessed in many ways and should be assessed in many different ways, whether formally or informally, whether it's external exams such as Cambridge IGCSE or Cambridge Checkpoint, or whether internally and informally, like Cambridge International Progression Tests, or the subjects topic tests, where the teachers mark their own assessments. Then we've got the teaching and learning environment. Are learners in the best possible place to learn? Are unnecessary demands being imposed upon them? So one way to assess the teaching and learning environment is to use the Cambridge International School Self-Evaluation Service. But it's important to know that a poor teaching and learning environment makes the task of processing new information overly complex. It's called cognitive load theory. So as in the classroom, you need to be able to remove obstacles to learning. For example, poor behaviour, outdated equipment, outdated teaching methods. It isn't about dumbing down lessons and reducing the demand of the curriculum, but it's about clearing away, I suppose you would call it, the background noise, so that learners can really focus on this task of processing new information. And finally, personal attributes. So are the learners good at the processes of learning, and are they ready to learn? So every learner has a unique combination of personal attributes that can help or hinder their learning. And some of these, you've heard of 21st century skills. Wellbeing would be included in this, personality traits. So some of them are very long lasting, such as your personality. Some of them are very temporary, such as well-being, and it's not always too easy to assess or evaluate them. And we've got various tools that we can use to assess them. I've already mentioned the Cambridge CEM Wellbeing check, There's a Cambridge Personal Styles Questionnaire. And also, if you are a Cambridge school and do any of the Cambridge IGCSEs, you will know that the Cambridge Learner attributes are embedded in our syllabuses, both as an input, but also as an output. And just to remind ourselves, here is the list: confident, responsible, reflective, innovative, and engaged. So, where do assessments from Cambridge fit within the framework? So, just to remind us, we've got the baseline tests, we've got English tests, we've got the IGCSEs, Checkpoint. In case you are not aware, Cambridge Checkpoint is primary and lower secondary. Cambridge International Progression Tests, we've got the Self-Evaluation Service, Cambridge Personal Styles Questionnaire, the Wellbeing Check, and then we've got the Cambridge Learner attributes as an input and an output, because they are an educational success. And also we've got Cambridge International and Cambridge English qualifications. However, the beauty of this framework is it doesn't have to be based on Cambridge. We at Cambridge know and completely understand that there are other types of assessments and insights that teachers are going to want to map and going to want to analyse. So we've got things like entrance tests, we've got PISA assessments or the national assessments. We've got the school's own assessments, whether topic, end of year. You might have school inspections, attendance records, tutor observations of the tutees in their form, or tutor sometimes called the homeroom educator. Participation in achievements in extracurricular activities. It's not necessarily just about certificates, but it could be about progression to the next level of education. It could be just about being a good citizen, or having life competencies that mean that you are fitting in well, you are desirable, teamwork, leadership, for any job in the future. So the key message about this framework, about the learning environment, it's good to gain insights in all 5 areas. And since I've started using this framework, it's helped me enormously, because I've felt that I was focusing too much on domain knowledge. And combining Chem test results with information from other assessments and evaluation is very, very powerful. And it's really good guide for next steps to supporting learners to reach their potential. But I haven't finished yet, because teaching and learning are usually used in the same breath, excuse me. You can't have outstanding teaching without outstanding learning, and you're not going to have outstanding learning without excellent teaching. So the note about the teaching environment: 2 sides of the same coin. The assessment data that I've talked about so far reflects the learner, but it also can be used to identify areas of improvement in teachers and departments. And also, I don't know if you noticed earlier, the Cambridge Learner attributes are mirrored in the teacher attributes. So, for example, we talked about school value added earlier. That can be used to identify overperforming or underperforming departments. So, for example, in this particular graph, English literature and French have been performing, and this is a UK GCSE 9-1, have been performing particularly well. So senior leaders could be asking, what have you been doing? Is there good practice that we could share across the school? In biology, chemistry, maths and physics, there's been negative value added. Have you got a new teacher that perhaps needs extra support? Do you need to do some mentoring? Do you need to do some professional development? What is it about those subjects and the teachers within those subjects that we can look at and help? Because at the end of the day, all of us are here to educate young people, and they need to progress to move on to the next stage. So, what makes teaching successful? So I had a little think about this. So I've put against cognitive skills and capability. A teacher needs to be able to make decisions, be creative, be able to evaluate and think about how to evaluate progress, how to evaluate students, how to evaluate whether an assessment is appropriate, and to be able to reflect on their own practice. And then I've got cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding. And I put, well, actually, no subject teacher and no subject can work in isolation. So cross-curricular support and collaboration, understanding and interpreting data, linking that data to strategies for improvement. And this is very, very important, individual and timely feedback to learners so that they know how they need to improve. Domain knowledge, well, apart from the obvious very deep content knowledge, effective communication skills in order to be able to communicate that knowledge. Then we have the teaching and learning environment. We've got classroom management, the quality of instruction, and the teaching climate. I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. And of course, we've got the personal attributes of the teacher, the teacher beliefs, and the Cambridge teacher attributes. And I went and had a look at some research that was published by the Sutton Trust in 2014. So we've got here, just touching on some of them, areas, use of data and effective feedback. You need to be able to understand and interpret assessment data and insights and link to strategies and know whether the strategies actually work or not, and use the data to give feedback. We've got content knowledge, deep knowledge and understanding of the subject being taught, but that goes hand in hand, very importantly, with the communication skills. As a teacher, you need to be able to understand the learner's way of thinking about this content and their ability to evaluate the thinking behind the learner's own methods, and to be able to identify learners' common misconceptions. And then we've got the quality of instruction. As a teacher, you need to be skilled at effective questioning, the effective use of assessment, and review of prior learning. And I have to say that this one I found difficult to grasp, allowing enough time to practice, to embed new skills securely. And I'm going to put an extra bit in there, allowing time for learners to answer questions and be able to scaffolding by starting with prior learning and progressively introducing new skills and knowledge to that foundation. And then we've got the teaching climate, good quality relationships where the learners can be challenged, where they feel safe to be challenged, develop academic competence, and where the teacher attributes success due to the effort and also values resilience to failure. And then we've got classroom management, efficient use of lesson time, coordination of resources and space, and behaviour management. So clearly and consistently. And finally, in personal attributes, we've got the teacher beliefs. So how their learners learn, and a belief that the teacher's role is at the centre of that learning. And I just put up here again these attributes because what I found extremely interesting that research has shown within Cambridge is that the Cambridge teachers need to be confident, responsible, reflective, innovative and engaged. They have to have these attributes in order to be able to identify them in their learners. So, in conclusion, positive learning occurs when there is a safe learning environment, support specialist support, high quality teaching, timely and personalised feedback. So where does CEM fit into all of this? Well, Cambridge CEM provides assessment products and a framework to gather data and insights to support improving these areas. There's some acknowledgements there of some of the research that I have looked at. And I just want to say a great big thank you to my colleagues from Cambridge CEM and International Education for their support, the conversations, the feedback. And I've talked quite enough. So thank you for your time, and hopefully you might have some questions for me.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for your presentation there. It was really interesting and a lot to think about there. As you say, we've got some time for questions. So if there's anything you'd like to ask Suzanne about what you heard today, or if you had any other questions about creating a positive teaching and learning environment, please do pop them in the chat on the right hand of your screen. We'd love to hear from you, or to hear about what practices you're already using. I'll give people a few minutes to put some questions in there. Let's see if we've got any. So we have a question here about assessment and evaluation. Would you recommend entry assessments as a prerequisite for a student to move to the next year group?
I think you're saying that it would be a pass or a fail assessment, and I would say that if a student had very large gaps in learning through absence or ill health, and that had been identified and discussed with not only the student, the tutor, but also the parent, then it could be a good idea for them to repeat a year. I don't think there should be a pass or fail assessment to move on to the next year. I think that there can be extra support put in place, because moving on to the next year isn't just about academic performance. We talked about 21st century competencies. We talked about well-being. The social side of learning is as important, but not so celebrated, let's say, as the academic side. And if a student at the end of the year had been assessed to be not progressing so well in one or two subjects, then some kind of extra support could be put in place to help them. But I do feel that they ought to stay with their friendship groups, with their peer group. I think that's very important.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. We have another question here, which is about sharing best practice. So how can schools support their teachers to create a positive teaching environment? And do you have any advice or tips on sharing best practices from teacher to teacher?
I do. So actually, start small, start within the subject areas. So every departmental meeting, you could have number 1, progress, and everybody could talk about progress of their classes. And then you could talk, so using the framework, you would identify any gaps or any barriers to learning. So you could start off with those, so this class has struggled really hard with shapes in maths. So you've got that question. Has anybody else in the department got any advice on how to fill that gap? There's already somebody sharing good practice with an answer to that question. But I would also, at school-wide meetings, include a section on sharing good practice every single meeting that you have and get different areas, different subjects. It could even be pastoral, anything you like about sharing some good practice that the entire staff could share. So that's two very easy ways and sort of embedding it into your meeting time. Another thing that I have found really, really useful, surprisingly useful, and it's quite old-fashioned now in the UK, is called triad teaching. So you have a triad. So people volunteer, or you volunteer them as a senior leader, onto an action research project that lasts a term. And you put the teachers in threes, so a triad, from different subjects. And then you do some work together over a term where I can remember working, so I'm a modern foreign languages teacher, so I was there for French. I was working with a history teacher and I think a science teacher, and we co-planned. We discussed how we would approach different issues. We observed each other's lessons and we wrote notes and gave feedback, but also we took one area. For example, I think I took assessment for learning, so formative assessment from the history teacher's lesson, and then I planned it into my lesson plan. And she had a look at my lesson plan in advance, and she came and observed that lesson and gave me feedback. So that is a really constructive, really hands-on action way of sharing good practice. And then we all in this scheme went and gave a presentation to the rest of the staff about what we had learned and our experiences. I'm sure there are lots of other ways, but that was just 3 examples.
Thank you, Suzanne. That sounds like a really, some interesting tips there. And I know you mentioned this during your presentation, but we have some great resources on the Cambridge CEM website in the Positive Learning tab. So we've got all of the quick guides available for teachers, which run through lots of tips and research around creating a good environment.
Can I just say something about that? So, for example, there are a couple of quick guides on there. One of them is improving vocabulary, and another one is improving vocabulary or interventions with EAL learners. And here is a really good example of needing to know which area of insight the gap or the barrier is, because improving vocabulary will work for first language English speakers as well as foreign or second language English speakers. We know that. But there's also a specific guide for second language or additional language, whatever you want to call it, learning, which is specific for EAL learners. And that's a really quick example of why you need to know, pinpoint why a learner is not making the expected amount of progress.
No, that's great, thank you. Yeah, I'd really encourage people to go have a look at those. They're available on our website. We've got a question from Elizabeth just asking how to access the Cambridge Wellbeing check and the personal style questionnaire. So we have information about all of those products and resources on our website. So I can send you a link to that, Elizabeth, after the session. We also have a question about communicating with parents and how we can talk to parents about the importance of a positive learning environment and generally opening up discussions about well-being where appropriate.
Right. This topic of communicating with parents is something that I'm very passionate about. It's sometimes called the golden triangle. So students or learners that make the most progress are working in a triad, in a triangle with the school and the parent. And sometimes the parent is absent or the parent doesn't necessarily understand, and it makes that relationship a little bit difficult. I've actually written it isn't even a quick guide. It's a really quick A4 leaflet on that positive learning site about sharing data with parents and having learning conversations. Cambridge CEM Understand, they have actually produced a parent report in accessible language for parents. Now, when I was in schools, we tended to we didn't have that. And we used some of the reports that we would use as teachers or as senior leaders. And for example, for the chances graph, the parents would just fixate on the tallest line and say, right, my child obviously is going to get an A star. And then we'd have to explain about actually the child that had to do some work and we had to do some teaching and learning in order to get that far. I think communication with parents is very, very important. And I think that actually your teaching staff could do with some guidance and some training on how to talk to parents, because I found with the teaching qualifications, you don't always necessarily get that kind of training. And I think you'll agree, senior leaders, that on-the-job training isn't always the best way. So support your teachers in how you would talk to parents, whether you're going to discuss data with them, how you're going to discuss data with them. If you're going to use Cambridge CEM, are you going to use the special report for parents? And also look at those reports from the point of view of the parents and perhaps produce a guide. Think of some of the questions that they might be asking. I did information parents evenings, I can remember doing, explaining how we were going to work and how we were going to look at data and what our learning conversations were going to be in advance. I do know that some of the parents had had very bad experiences at school. So when they were called into school to have a conversation about their child, they were already on the defensive because they already had that prior baggage with them, and explaining to them, no, this is actually meant to be a positive experience. Yeah, I think you need to have a policy and you need to have support both for the parents and for the teaching staff.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, it can be quite difficult subject, can't it? So that's some really useful tips there. So we've got time for perhaps another question or two. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We've got one here. Let me just have a look. So is it okay to share predicted grades before exams with both the parents and the learners and discuss strategies of improvement, or commend the learner? What happens if they then don't get the attained grade or the predicted grade? What is your approach to this?
We always used to share that information. We used to have a 3-year IGCSE course. So it's stage 9 or year 9. We used to look at the chances graphs from mid-year for doing options, and it didn't used to be a barrier, but we used to guide students and have conversations with them about what their future progression plans were, what they enjoyed, and advise them, no, for example, don't just decide to do history because your friends are doing history. That isn't a good enough decision. So we do that, we use the chances graph there. And then when we talked about parents' evenings all the way through IGCSE and at A level, we look at these chances graphs, and we would talk about progress against the chances graphs. And I think it's really, really important to say that they are predictions based on potential. The progress that you are making is where you are actually at as a learner now, they are not forecast grades, they are predictions. And actually have a really clear definition for each term for the teachers to make sure that they know that they are using the consistent and correct language with learners and parents. And I think it's important that learners know where they're at the moment and where they're heading. And it's really important to know how they're going to get there on their journey, because you can't just say you need to go from a D to a C. I mean, I think the learner should turn around and say to any subject teacher, how? And you should break it down into steps, and it should be small steps. So you would say for the next 6 weeks, if you concentrate, I don't know, for example, in your English, making your point and giving explanations for your point. We'll focus on that. And if you focus on that on your homework, I will give you feedback on that so that you know that you're making progress. And then we will reflect on where you are in 6 weeks' time, and then we'll give you another target on how to progress and how to improve. And it's a continuous cycle, and it's very important that you break it down into small steps, because you as a teacher are the expert in how to learn, and you need to show the learner how to learn, because they're not going to know how to do it on their own.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Suzanne. So I believe that's all the questions we have today, but if there is anything you would like to know or would like to discuss further, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can get in touch at chem@cambridge.org, or all of our contact details are available on our website. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Suzanne for her time today and her presentation. And thank you to all for attending. We hope that you found it useful and informative. Just a reminder that we'll be sending the recording round next week. But please, like I say, do get in touch if you have any questions before then. We have some more webinars in the next few weeks and months, taking a in-depth look at our assessment products and also taking a regional focus. So keep an eye out for emails and information about those. So thank you again, everyone, for your time today, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.